Hello everybody and welcome to another Visualization Network how-to video. I'm your host Tom Crawford and today's topic is creating well-formed data for charts and graphs. In the first video in this series, we looked at the 4 principles of consistency for creating well-formed data for charts and graphs. Today, we're going to look a little more in depth at the 4th principle, using the lowest sensible level of data. Take a look at this data, for example. A person's name. Seems simple, doesn't it? Why should it matter what we put in the column? The name is what's important. Well, to some extent that's true, but if we try to print this in a report, or sort by last name, or create a salutation in a letter or email, suddenly this data becomes unusable. The same is true and even more complex for an address. What if we want to know how many people live in New York, or which friends of ours are in a city that we might be visiting? While a human could do it visually, if there were thousands of records, that task would quickly become unwieldy. So let's look at a few series of functions in Excel that relate to extraction and concatenation. If your data is consistent, you can use Excel's extract functions to bring the data to the lowest sensible level. There are 5 basic functions we're going to need. Let's take a look at them one at a time. First is the search. We need to know where the first name begins and ends. Well, we know it begins in the very first character, so that part's pretty easy. We also know that in our data, each first and middle name is separated by a space. So that helps us a lot. We can first search for the space, and that function in Excel is search. So we're going to search for a space in A2, and we know it starts with the first character, so we don't need to put another value in there. We could have it start later, but in this case we're going to start searching at the very first character. And yes, it found a space at character number 5. Let's just test this with our other names, and yes, it is finding the space appropriately, so that is good. Now, to extract the first name, we just need to add one more function in, which is the left function. It will find us every character starting at the left side of A2, and it's going to go, in this case, for 5. Remember, that was our result, for 5 characters. Well, we don't really want the space included, so we're going to add one more, which will then only take the left 4 characters, and look at that. It pulled just Mary. If we copy that function down, Mary, John, Stephen, Susan, Jack, it did it just right. So finding the middle name can be a little more complex. So sometimes it's easier with these to break them out into steps. So let's do that. We're going to insert a few extra columns. And the first thing we're going to find is space number 1 and then space number 2. So in space number 1, we know that we can find that very easily with search for a space in A2, just like we did. And there it is. That's 5. That's just what we needed. Now we need to find space number 2. So we're going to also do a search of a space in A2, but this time we're going to start with space number 1 plus 1. So that's going to say to the character just to the right of the space, start our search, and look at that, it found a space in space number 10, which is correct. It actually makes finding our last name very easy. So let's do that before we do the middle name. There's another function. So we've used left and we've used search. There's also right. In right, we're going to look at A2 again. The number of characters is the length. Here's our 4th function of A2. We want to know the total length of it minus what is space number 2. So that's E2. Put that in, and there we have Smith. Copy that down, and look at that. We have all of the last names. So by separating the formulas out, it makes it a little bit easier to think about. Eventually, you may want to hide these columns, or you can combine them into be one formula, but by separating them out, it makes it a little bit easier. So now let's look at the middle name. The final function then is mid. We're going to look in the middle of A2, which is the text we want to extract the middle name from. We're going to start at D2, which is our space 1, plus 1 space. Again, we don't want to include the space as part of it. So we're going to go for the length of A2 minus the length of the first name minus the length of the last name minus 2 for the additional spaces that are in there, and there we have the middle name. There are actually multiple ways to accomplish that formula, but this is one very simple way to make that happen. We can see that we have the name separated out into individual fields. So now we have the lowest level of data. If you want, though, these can then easily be recombined into things like a salutation. So often salutations start with dear. Again, we're going to do a formula to do our concatenation. So we start, as we do with all formulas, with the equal sign. Dear is going to be the same on each one. So we have that, and we have a space, and then we put in an ampersand, which is the concatenation symbol in Excel. And then we put what field we want in there, which is going to be the first name, B2. We probably want a comma or maybe a colon. So we'll put another ampersand to concatenate this, and put in a comma, because this will be a friendly letter. And there we go. We have our salutation that can then be included automatically. That easy. So concatenation is a little more simple, which is why the fourth principle matters a lot, to take things down to the lowest relevant data, because adding things back together is much easier than separating them apart. It is important to notice that there are a couple other little things that you may need to take care of, especially when dealing with names, but it also comes up with addresses. Sometimes space isn't the divider, but a comma is. We can use the exact same formula. Now in this case, though, the first thing in our list is last name. So we can create a very simple formula. Again, left of A7 in this case. The number of characters, we need to do a search this time, but our search, we're looking for a comma within A7, starting at the beginning, but we're going to do then again -1 because we do not want the comma to show up in the name, and there we go, we have a last name for those two people. A similar process could be used to extract the middle name and first name as we did previously. However, a couple cautions with names. Various compound names like O'Malley or McGeorge are formatted differently. So sometimes they may have a space, as in this McGeorge example, in which case our formula wouldn't work because Mick would be picked up as a middle name. Or you might have two middle names, or Mick might be picked up as the last name if it was Steve Allen McGeorge. Then you have four names and our formula falls apart. Or maybe the title is included in some of them. So it's very important that before you go through and create formulas that you make the data consistent so that your formula will work across the board. So those are some tips for extraction and concatenation for text. Same principles work on addresses that worked on the names. However, now let's take a look at, and there are ways to extract numbers as well. Sometimes you just want the whole number on the left. There's a very simple function for that. Truncate whatever field you want, in this case O2, and we'll copy it down to see the examples. It just extracts the number to the left of the decimal point. There's also the round function. It's very similar, but trunc takes whatever the number is, 24, 321, 40, 123. Round is a little different. Round will often come up with the same number, but not necessarily. If we round O2, look, it's 24. But in the second example, it's 322. It rounded up. In the third, it's 41, negative. But there are specific functions. Maybe you always want to round up. If you're collecting money and you want to collect whole numbers, you can do a specific round up of O2 to 0, and it will always round up, even if the number naturally, as in the first example, would have rounded down to 24. Or if you want to do it in the customer's benefit, there's round down. So it always rounds down. There are a couple ways to get the number to the right of the decimal point in case you want to deal with the change for some reason, or if it's not money, if you're dealing with something else, you want to deal with just the decimals. You can extract those as well. And that's just a really simple function. The number, then, O2, minus the truncated number. That's the one that's always whatever is to the left of the decimal. And then your remainder is the remaining amount. So there you go. Several functions to extract and concatenate data in order to create the lowest sensible level of data. In the next video, normalization, we'll take a look at how to deal with more complex data structures. We hope to see you then. Thanks, everybody.